Good morning. Welcome to the training webinar. If you're watching on YouTube, it may or may not be morning. I don't know what time of the day it is for you. Today, we're going to talk about building a special kind of application. And I'm going to kind of switch back and forth between Process Director and a presentation to cover the topics that we're going to talk about today. We're going to build an automated check-in application today that will allow us to check some items out and wait for some period of time and then prompt for a check-in. Most of the time, when we talk about processes, we kind of talk about automating the process itself. Today, we're going to go a little bit beyond there. What we're going to talk about is automation that extends just beyond determining who approves what, where during the course of a normal timeline. What we're going to talk about is automating processes themselves. Now, there's always been a way to kick off processes in Process Director. For example, you could, back in the good old days, create a Windows scheduler trigger. And with that Windows scheduler trigger, you could prompt a knowledge view, and that knowledge view would then kick off a process. And you could do that, but you had to do that outside of Process Director. So it's a little unwieldy. You kind of have to know how the Windows scheduler works, how to prompt it. You have to be able to build the URL for the knowledge view that you want to run. You have to call it specifically through the bputil utility rather than calling it directly. So you could just call the URL directly from Windows Scheduler, but if you do that, it won't release it. And so it's just hanging out in your system. And so you want to call bputil because bputil would then in turn call the URL and it would release it as soon as the knowledge view was invoked. So it's unwieldy. We don't have to worry about that unwieldiness now. There's another problem with the Windows Scheduler, which is that you can't query it. You can't find out when it ran. I mean, you could go back and look at the WinSched logs. There's a lot of extra friction to trying to automate a process that way. That's why we created goals, because goals can do their own scheduling inside Process Director. There is an evaluation mechanism for goals, which is that you can have a history or you can simply query the current state of the goal itself. For example, when we look at a goal, we have the goal history. I can't seem to find my mouse. There we are. We have the goal history, which tells us what the previous value was and what the current value is of the goal. This is a system-wide state, so we can query it at any time. So unlike trying to run a process by having a knowledge view that runs a process for each row in the knowledge view, and that gets invoked with the Windows Scheduler, we don't really have any insight to how that's working or performing or when it's running or what the status of it was. Goals fix all of that because we can evaluate at a specified frequency, we can invoke processes, and so we can do a lot of interesting things with goals that go far beyond just doing an evaluation and setting some value like nothing due or books due. So goals are a pretty neat way of being able to do that. So we're going to build this automated check-in app, and we're going to leverage that automation with a goal and with knowledge views. And we're going to do this by building these objects that you see here on the screen. And we're going to build this sample app that will take a checkout of some item, and that will then go quiescent. And at some appropriate time, the goal will run. We'll find that we have reached the time where we need to check in that item, and we'll kick off a process to run that check-in process. And the reason why we're going to do this and why we're going to automate this through the sample that we're going to have here, which is a book checkout process. And I have books. It could actually be anything. There could be equipment that your organization needs to check out. Now, some of that equipment might be books, but it's probably, bigger than that. Like, let's say that you have a piece of equipment that you check out. Maybe it's every 6 months, maybe it's every year, whatever the time period is. And then at some point, we're going to need that equipment item to come back. For the book, it needs to go back into the library because you should be done reading the book. For a piece of equipment, maybe we don't need it checked in per se, but we do need to have the person who was issued the equipment bring it back, mainly because it needs a maintenance check, or it may, for some piece of electronic equipment, need routine recalibration. For 10 years, I was a military policeman. And at the time, we ran the KR-11 radar unit in our patrol cars. And that unit needed to be recalibrated on a routine basis so that if somebody was driving, 10 miles an hour, it wouldn't show their speed as 45 miles an hour. And so for a lot of equipment, you need to bring it back in for maintenance on a recurring basis. What you don't want in a situation like that is for someone to check out an item and then have sort of an active wait task or some other active task that is holding that checkout in a pending state for a year. You want to do your checkout, and then you want to end that process. In a year, when that equipment or book or whatever needs to come back and be recalibrated, you're going to want to invoke a new process. And the reason that you don't want to keep that process just sitting there in limbo for a year is because every time your timer checks run, we have to poke every single running timeline instance to see whether it needs to be moved forward. So if I've got 1,000 pieces of equipment that I have checked out, or 1,000 books, as we'll do today, those timelines all have to exist. Those are 1,000 timelines now that need to be poked every time that the timer runs, so that we know that we are not to the date where we have to request that check-in or that return for maintenance or whatever it might be. So we don't want a whole bunch of in-flight processes just sitting there doing nothing for a year and taking up timer space, because it takes an irreducible amount of time to go in and try to poke all of those running activities. It's funny, you can't see it, but every time I say poke, I'm doing this with my finger, but I'm doing it below the screen. So just a thing that I'm doing. In any event, we want to avoid that. So our checkout process is going to be real simple. We're going to check out a book. We're going to run a short process, a really short process. It does nothing but send a notification and then ends. Now I don't have anything running, but I've still got my book. I've still got it for a year. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a goal every day. And that goal is going to check to see what books are checked out and to check and see when they were checked out to see if it's time to return them. So the checkout process, once I check the book out, will end immediately after I am notified of my checkout, and the notification also tells me what my due date is going to be. And the goal will handle all of the follow-up. A year from now, it will just magically pop up and will notify me that I have check-in. It will assign a task to me to check my book back in. And so there's no open process. It's just going to be sitting there waiting for me to be notified at the right time. It's just going to happen automatically through the process automation that we're going to build. Now, there are several moving parts to make this thing work. And I am not going to be able to do it all in this session. I think I advanced the slide too soon. So I'm not going to be able to do it in this session. In order to do it, I would have to build everything like within 10 minutes per item. I don't think I can do that. I think we can, however, review it in 10 minutes. So I've got it already built, and we're going to review an already built application. So we're going to start off then with our form. Now, we don't need much to make this work, so we'll take a look at the form here in a second. I only really need 3 fields. I need the name of the book, the checkout date, and who the person is who checked the book out. But I do need to be able to track that. At some point, I am going to have to run a goal to check that book, to see if that book has been checked out for the appropriate amount of time, to see if it's due for check-in. And then I'm going to need to obviously run the process for that. Well, I'm going to need 2 things to make that work. I'm going to need some sort of checked out field that tells me that the book is currently checked out. And then I'm going to need to have a field that is really just a tracking field that lets me know that the check-in for that book has already been prompted. We're going to be starting a checkout process. And it's going to run every day from the goal, as we'll see. So I need this check-in prompted so that the very first time that I'm prompted for check-in and I'm assigned a check-in task, I don't want to be assigned a new task every day on a new process timeline. I only want to kick off that check-in once to assign me the task. And now I've got an active task that exists in my task list. So once that task has been assigned to me, I need to be able to track that that has happened. And so I need this check-in prompted field so that the next time the goal runs, it will not re-prompt me and assign another task to me. So let's start off by going ahead and looking at our book checkout form. So we've already seen the fields. We'll take another look at them again. There are a couple of little wrinkles here that I want to talk about. We obviously need our book title. We need our checkout date, and we need to know who the book was checked out by. We also have our checked out and check-in. So these are the only 5 fields we use. We just talked about them. But here's a couple of things that we might do. I have the field properties for the checked out by user picker, which is who we decide is going to check the book out. I've got that set to a default value of form submit user. So when I open the form, it will automatically assign the checkout to me. So we're assuming that I'm checking things out myself. In the real world, that's probably not how it's going to work. In the real world, you're probably going to have some equipment administrator or librarian, I guess, in this case, who is going to specify who checked out the book. It'll be the librarian who handles the book checkout. If I set the default value to form submit user, that's probably not going to be useful in the real world because the user who checks the item out is probably not the one who's going to be administering the checkout. So in the real world, you would not set a default value here. We would just expect the user to be picked based on who they actually are rather than who is submitting the form. I have set it here on this simply to make my life easier. For the checked out field, on the other hand, you probably do want to set a default value in that field so that when the form is first opened, the checked out checkbox is checked. That's going to be super useful because it's going to make life easier for your librarian. In fact, both the checked out field and the check-in prompted fields are 2 checkboxes that you might not even need to appear on the form because they are status tracking fields, both of them. I've got to know if a book is checked out, And I've got to know if the person who checked it out has now been notified that it's due and they need to check it back in. I don't think in normal circumstances that these would be visible fields on the form, even though in our case, they will be visible fields. Then we need to move out to our checkout timeline. When the form is submitted, it's going to invoke a timeline. There is not much to see here because all this timeline is going to do is to send a checkout notification to the user. And as soon as it does that, it ends. And I suppose we should look at this checkout notification as well. And this is basically an informational template that just tells the user what book they checked out, when they checked it out, and when the due date was. So let's talk about the due date. There are a couple of different ways that we could do this, and this is purely a matter of preference. So in my case, I've decided that what I'm going to do is I am just going to derive the due date programmatically. So if we look over here, that due date field that I have set up there is a system variable control. And the system variable I am using is the form field system variable for our checkout date field. And then I've put in days equals 365. So what that will do is it will just add 365 days to the checkout date, and that will be my de facto due date. Technically, what I could do on my book checkout form, and this may be something that you prefer to do, is I could create a due date field. Notice no such due date field exists. I am not tracking it as a real field. You could, however, if you wanted to, you could simply create another date time picker right next to your checkout date. You could call it due date. And what you would do is make your checkout date an event field. And whenever you change the checkout date, we would update the due date field and set it to, basically we'd update it just the same way we saw it just now in the checkout notification. We would just set it to checkout date, comma, days equals 365, and it would just add 365 days to our checkout date and would set that due date automatically. If I have the due date, then I can query that due date directly whenever I run my knowledge views or my which inform my goals and determine what processes get invoked. So you could do it that way. I chose not to, but that is a perfectly valid way of doing it. And it would store the due date as an actual data item on the form that you could grab your data from. But that's entirely up to you as to whether you want to do that. So as a practical matter, when I decide that I'm going to run this and I'm going to check an item out, so we'll go back up here to automated check-in. I don't want to save anything. Completed app, that's where we need to be. There is our book checkout form. So we're going to run it. And there we go. Our book title, old Isaac Asimov classic, Nightfall. And we're going to set our checkout date to today, the 26th of March, 2026. It is checked out by me. The book is checked out. And I can just go ahead and submit it. So there we go. I will not even be able to go to active timelines to be able to catch it because it is already done. All I have are completed timelines because we checked out Nightfall on 3/26/2026. And in my email inbox, please pop out. There we go. there is my checkout notification message that tells me I've checked out the book. So my process is done. The checkout process is over. Obviously, your checkout process might be a little more complex than that. There might be, some approvals if it's expensive equipment or what have you. But just note that it does have the proper due date for 3/26/2027. It is possible that might be too precise for you. I've just set, 365 days after the date. And so some of you will certainly be saying in your minds, what about leap years? Okay, if you want to use years equals 1, you can also do that. I just did days equals 365. I think that is a close enough approximation to cover us in most cases. All right, so as we've just seen, all the timeline does is just run that notification and then stop. Real clean. It ends immediately. This is important. Our checkout process has a definite end. I see a lot of times people using wait tasks, sometimes very long wait tasks. Now, look, that it is appropriate to do that sometimes. There may be timelines where I need to throw in a 48-hour pause or a 1-week pause or something like that. And that is perfectly legitimate. And because we're so used to doing that, our first thought is always, well, I'll just throw in a 365 days wait activity. But just remember that is always problematic because we're going to have all of these timelines that are running. You've got a persistent process timeline that is there. Ultimately, depending on how often you do this, you are going to have performance effects. If you have 10,000, running process timelines that are just hanging in a wait status, every time the timer process runs, as I said previously, all of those running processes have to be poked. And so your timer run goes from taking 3, 4, 5 minutes to taking 15, 20, 30 minutes as you just stack up a whole bunch of running process timelines that don't actually need to be running because we're not doing anything for a year. And so you might ultimately start to see some performance degradation whenever you try to scale that up, especially if you're in a large organization with many users. Doing it this way, having the timeline just end after the checkout, that means that our 1-year waiting period, we don't have to monitor any of those timelines. At some point, ultimately, a year later, we are going to have to invoke something again to run that book check-in. But that's fine. We can do that. We already know what books are checked out. We can query that. And if we can query it, we can also derive what the due date is for it. And so there's no reason to keep that process running. Which brings us to a key consideration you have to think about whenever you are doing wait tasks. Is it okay, rather than having a wait task, if I end my process here at whatever step I'm at, and then some period of time goes by and I just invoke a new process? Do I need an unbroken process that runs from start to finish, or can it be split up into discrete processes? Now, it might be that you need to run a complete process from start to finish because somewhere later on in the process, I'm going to make reference to some activities that occurred earlier in the process. And in a case like that, I would argue, okay, you need to have an unbroken process, so you need that wait task. But once you start talking about long-term wait tasks, which is something other than some temporary pause for reflection during the timeline, right? I mean, it's not unreasonable to say, I want to hold for 48 hours to give everybody a chance to do something that they need to do prior to continuing. That's reasonable. It may be reasonable to wait for a week. It might be reasonable to wait for a month. Beyond that, I think we have to take a very careful look at about why we're waiting, because now we're just keeping a whole bunch of idle and yet active and persistent timeline instances constantly running on our system. In terms of efficiency, ending the process and then restarting it with a goal is a much better way of doing it, especially because the goal will be able to handle all of our outstanding check-ins that we might need to have tracked. So now we've got to figure out how we're going to do that, and we're going to need a couple of different objects. Well, I say a couple. We're going to need precisely 6 different objects to make this work. We're going to need some sort of check-in notification so that the user gets notified that a check-in is due for them. In most cases, you're going to build this first. And the reason that you're going to build this first is because whenever you build the timeline, you're going to have it, it's going to need to exist first as a reference target for your process timeline. So it's the easiest thing to build first. Then we're going to have our book due timeline. And maybe we need to build our form as well before we do that, before we do our timeline, so that we have our check-in notification and the form, and then we can build our timeline, and we'll have just one timeline for each overdue book. And what we're going to do is we're going to make the checkout form the primary form for that timeline, and it's just going to have a couple of activities. We are going to set that default form. So we're going to take the checkout form. We're going to make that the default form for the timeline. And then we're going to set our checkbox that the user has been prompted. And then we're going to run a user task. And that's the actual check-in task that will be assigned to the user. We're going to need a couple of knowledge views now to make those 3 objects work. We're going to need a knowledge view to prompt the book check-in. And we're going to need a books due knowledge view that will tell the goal what books are due, and that will invoke the prompt due check-in. We're going to need a business value. That business value is going to check our books due knowledge view to see if we have any books due. If we do, we'll say nothing needs to be checked in. And if we do, we'll have to check those in. And then we'll have our goal that actually runs the entire process that invokes it. It will look at that books due knowledge view. And if there is more than 0 books, we are going to run the prompt book check-in knowledge view. And that prompt book check-in knowledge view is going to invoke the notify book due timeline, which is going to kick off all of our processes. If books equals 0, then we're just going to set the result that nobody has done anything, and we are good to go. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our configuration. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So this is our books due application, and it is essentially a separate application, or I guess we would call it a sub application of our book checkout. So let's go through step by step and look at all of the items that we're going to need to build. And I said we needed a form. We don't need a form. We need a notification. The form is coming from our book checkout form. So let's start off with the notification itself. And it's just a normal check-in notification. And it's very similar to the notification that we sent previously. It contains much the same data with a couple of additions. Our book check-in is required. I probably should have made that heading 1. Oh, except it also makes my task instructions heading 1. So let's add in let's add in a line break there, and we'll configure that so it says book check-in required. I've added my task instructions. And then, of course, I have the 3 form fields that are relevant here. And then I've got a complete the check-in. Now, remember, I'm going to be assigned a task. And so I'm going to use the email URL system variable for this hot link control so that when they click on it, it opens up the form and will be using the same form that we use for checkout. We're just going to transfer it to this process. So it'll open up that form and enable the book to be checked in. Once I have that notification, then I can move on to my book due timeline. You know what? I should have saved that. I did not save that. Let's go back to it real briefly. And let's fix that up. And this time we'll save it before we close it. And once we've saved it, we'll go in and take a look at our book due timeline. So there's a couple of things that we're going to do a little special on this timeline that we normally don't do. We already have a checkout form. I'm going to want that checkout form to be the form for this timeline. Ultimately, what is going to happen is we are going to start the prompt book check-in knowledge view. This book check-in knowledge view will invoke a process for each row in the knowledge view. Now this, we'll look at it later, but it just returns one book per row. And so for each book, we're going to want to launch this process. Whenever you launch a process from a knowledge view, which returns form instances, when this knowledge view kicks off, it is going to take that form instance that I'm using for that row of the knowledge view, and it's going to attach that form instance to the process. Normally, in a process timeline, we would fill out the form for timeline property. We're not going to do that in this case because what we do not want is for a new instance of the book checkout form to be created for this process timeline instance. So we're going to leave this property blank. Now, we certainly need our check-in notification. That's very important because that is our default notification. That's why we created it first, so that it exists before we create our timeline. But we are going to leave this blank, and the reason that we're leaving the form for timeline property blank is because of the activities that we are going to invoke. Our first activity is going to be a form actions activity. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the book checkout form as our default form instance for this timeline. And we're also going to ensure that the add new form instance property is set to only if the form does not already exist in the package. When the knowledge view invokes this timeline instance, it is going to attach the original checkout form to it. So it already exists. So we're pointing to the book checkout form because we do want that form to be the default form instance for the timeline, which we set as set this as the default form instance for the timeline property. But we want to be sure that we don't create a new version of it if the existing version exists. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the original book checkout form that was part of the checkout process. It'll already be attached to the timeline instance, and now it's going to set it as the default form for the timeline instance. Second thing we are going to do is to set the checkout for that it's been prompted. So this is going to be a custom task timeline activity. And we're going to set the container form for the book checkout form. That's cool because the book checkout form, the original one, is now our primary form, our default form for the timeline. And we're just going to call set form data. And we're going to call set form data to do one thing. We're going to set check-in prompted to 1. This now lets the system know that this user is, or this book has now had the check-in prompt process started. And so we never have to restart it again. That's why we're setting that to 1. That'll become important momentarily whenever we start looking at the knowledge views. And then finally, we will do our checkbook in timeline activity. This is a user activity, and the participant is set to the checkout user form field because that is a user who checked out the book. So this will be the user who is assigned the task. And they don't really have any results. We're just going to have it complete. The user's actual result will be to uncheck the checkout or the checked out checkbox. I'm just going to do that manually. There are probably some more flashy ways that you could do that, but I'm just trying to keep it simple here. But we've got everything we need for a check-in process. I'm going to use the checkout form. I'm going to notify, I'm going to set it that the check-in process has been invoked, and then I'm going to assign the user task. So our setup is pretty cool here. I'm just checking this to be sure that I didn't miss anything. We've left form for timeline blank. We got our default email template. It's started by the prompt book check-in knowledge view once it runs, and then it has our 3 activities. So we are good to go with that. Now it's going to get a little more complex because now we're going to need to set up the knowledge view that is going to make all of this work. And we're going to have to filter this knowledge view in a specific way so that we know that the book is checked out. The checkout date was 365 days ago, and that the check-in prompted has not been checked. So we're going to need to filter all 3 of those things for the process. And what we're going to do is set this prompt book check-in knowledge view to run a process for each row in the knowledge view. So let's go look at our knowledge view. I don't believe I made any changes here, at least I shouldn't have. So we are going to skip past that and not save anything. So let's take a look at our prompt book check-in. And we're going to go through this tab by tab so we can see all of the configurations that we've made on it. The first thing we're going to do is set forms associated with knowledge view to book checkout form. There's another process down here that we can't set yet until we make a change on the next tab. So we'll leave that aside here for now. But to start off with, we are going to want to set forms associated with knowledge view to the book checkout form, because that's the form that we are going to return. We'll probably update at this point to save this change, but we're going to have to update on this next tab anyway, so maybe not update yet, but we are going to have to update once we get to the configure tab, because we are going to set the knowledge view results property. Now, by default, this property shows up as displayed in grid. We're going to want to change that. We're going to want to change that to run a process. This setting will invoke a process for each row in the knowledge view. If I have 5 books, that's 5 knowledge view rows. Or if I have 5 books due, that's 5 knowledge view rows. That's 5 process instances that we're going to want this knowledge view to invoke. So we're going to need to change this to run a process. And as soon as we do that, we're going to need to update. And the reason why we're going to need to update is because once I change this knowledge view results property to run a process, back on the properties tab, once I update the knowledge view, a new property called select process to run on each object will appear. This is where we have to return to set up our notify book due TL timeline as the process that we want to invoke when the knowledge view runs. You should be cautious at this point, because from this point on, anytime you run this knowledge view, it is going to invoke the process. So once we set this select process to run, if we run this knowledge view, and I know I do this a lot, I say, oh, I just want to see how it looks right now. And I go to update and run, and I run the knowledge view. Once I've set this to run a process, that knowledge view results, it is going to run the process. And at this point, it's going to run all of them because I have not filtered it properly. So danger, danger, danger at this point. On my options tab, I'm going to turn everything off but form instances. None of this other stuff has to be on. I know if you're an administrator and you run a knowledge view, you kind of sometimes want to have all of your action buttons on there so that you can go in and do stuff on the fly. You're never going to see this knowledge view. Nobody's ever going to look at it. Nobody's ever going to run it manually to see the results that get returned. It's just going to invoke the process. Since that is so, we just don't need to show anything. All we need to ensure is that under return these object types, form instances is checked. I only want it to return form instances. I really only want it to return form instances because I am invoking a process. And any object that get returned here are going to show up as a row in the knowledge view and will invoke a process. A lot of times when you first open up a knowledge view, it looks like that. Form instances, workflow instances, and timeline instances. In this case, that would be a bad thing because it is going to return the form instance and it's going to kick off a process. And then it's going to return the timeline instance, and it's also going to kick off a process, which we really don't want it to do because that would kick off 2 processes. So we're going to be sure that the only thing checked on the options tab is form instances. On the properties tab, it literally doesn't matter what you have for properties. These are the default properties. I didn't go in and change any of them. I don't care. Again, remember, I'm not going to look at this. It's not a manual knowledge view that I'm ever going to see. All it's going to do is kick off a process. As long as it returns, if I have any form data, which in this case is the name, although I do have checked out author, last updated, who cares what these fields are? I just needed to return the form so that I can attach that, or return the form instance so that I can attach that form instance to the process. So I literally do not care what happens on this tab, on the columns tab at all, because it doesn't matter. On the filter tab, however, it does matter because I'm going to need those 3 filters we talked about earlier. I'm going to need to ensure that the checked out field is checked. To check the document in, we're going to, when that document gets checked in, we're going to uncheck the checked out field. So if the checked out field is unchecked, the document isn't checked, or the book isn't checked out, so we don't care. It doesn't matter. So we're going to eliminate all of those. Then I got to look out the checkout date. Now, just as I did on the email template where I had to derive what the checkout date should be, I have to do the same thing here. I have to have where the checkout date is less than or equal to, and I'm just using 365 days ago. So it is going to look back 365 days. And if the date 365 days ago is less than or equal to the checkout date, and by the way, this is one of the most confusing properties you can set in Process Director. Think about what I just said. If the date, and that's what is going to get returned, this days ago 365 is going to return a date, whatever the date was 365 days ago. So it is going to return, I think, if I run it today, March 26th, 2025. That is a date value that gets returned. Checkout date is a date value. I am comparing this date value with this date value. So September or March 26th, 2025 should be less than or equal to the checkout date. So if the checkout date was March 26th and days ago 365 returns March 26th, both in 2025, then this condition passes because I'm looking for a date that is less than or equal to the checkout date. A lot of people think that what the days ago thing does is it says, okay, I'm going to look at this date and then I'm going to compare to see if this date was 365 days ago. That is not what is happening here. I'm not doing any counting or calculation using days ago or months ago or years ago. Well, that's not true. There is a date calculation happening, but I'm not calculating it based on this. I'm calculating it based on the current date, and I am returning a date value. So what you would think was you'd want the checkout date to be more than 365 days ago. But that's not the math it's doing. What it's going to do, this is a date value, and this date value is not going to change. The days ago, months ago, weeks ago, years ago is going to return a date value. Now I have two date values that I want to compare. And what I want to compare is if date value A, the checkout date, is less than or equal to value B, the whatever the due date is. And that way I'm doing a date comparison. I'm not doing a math comparison. So that always gets real confusing. This one thing trips up a lot of people. And in fact, if I'm not thinking about it, it trips me up too. So that second one is a little bit of a doozy. And because it is a little bit of a doozy, you might not want to do it this way. And this is the way that I've done it. But the more that I think about it, the more I think is that what I should have done is put a due date on the form. Because now all I need to do is to check out whether the due date is less than whatever or to see whether the checkout date is less than my due date. Actually, I would do it exactly. I think I'd do it exactly the opposite, but I would compare checkout date to due date as a field. And that would just seem to me a more logical way of thinking about it, because now I know I'm comparing two date fields. So doing the derivation for the due date is something that might get a little bit confusing. So you might just find it easier to understand if you have a hard due date on the form. You can do it this way. This is the way that I did it. I kind of did it this way on purpose for our demonstration. In the real world, would I do it this way? Probably not. I think I would probably save the due date as a field. I would just derive it via calculation when the form was originally submitted. Now I've got a due date, and I can just check to see whether the checkout date or whether the checkout date is, well, I don't know how that would save me here. Now I'm thinking about it. Because I can't just say the checkout date is less than or equal to the due date. I think I would have to do, if the due date, that's the way I'd have to do. I'd have to change this from checkout date. I wouldn't even look at checkout date. For this second condition, it would have to be due date is greater than, or sorry, less than or equal to current date. So here I would just, if I had the due date field, I would just say due date is less than or equal to current date. That makes a lot more sense, because if the due date is less than today, that means that we are now past the due date. That means it's now due for check-in. Now I can send the message out. So if you add the due date, it's going to change this second filter. The third filter will not change because I only want to invoke a process on processes that have not been invoked yet. So I do want to ensure that check-in prompted is not checked, so that I'm only going to return items that are checked out, items that are due, and items that have not been prompted for a check-in. And that gets me my process invocation on my notify book due timeline. So now I've got the basic pieces I need to do the process automation that I want. But I do need to now figure out how I'm going to invoke that process timeline. And for that, I'm going to need a couple of things. I'm going to need another knowledge view to return books due. All I want that knowledge view to do is to provide the data source for a business value. It's just going to return the count of overdue books. So I'm going to have a knowledge view and a business value that basically just return the number of overdue books. And I'm doing that because I need to have a business value that I need to check for the goal that I'm eventually going to run. So I'm going to need these two objects just to build in now the automation, because I now have the process that I want to automate. Now I've got to build the automation. So I'm going to need my book checkout form. I've already got that. I'm going to need the filter logic for my books due knowledge view, which is basically going to be exactly the same as the one that we just looked at in the previous knowledge view. And then I'm going to need the data source. So why are we doing it this way? Why are we building this business value using this knowledge view? Why couldn't we just use form instance data, which you can do, but likely we're going to need that K view for reporting. So by building that K view and then building a business value that just returns the number of rows in that K view, we're going to knock away or knock out two birds with one stone. We are going to have a knowledge view that we can view and look for reporting, and we can see what books are due. It's going to be very similar to the knowledge view we just created for the automation. But this one, we're going to be able to see for reporting, and we're going to be able to use as a method for checking out what books are currently due, separate from our process invocation. So we're probably going to need that for reporting. So just you now that we have it, because we're probably going to need some sort of knowledge view that we're going to be able to report on. Okay, well, now that we have that, we can just use that as the base for the business value, because all we care about in the business value is if there is more than 0 rows. If there are more than 0 rows, we're going to want to do something. We're going to want to kick off our process. So let's go ahead and build these two objects. Okay, where's my mouse pointer again? There it is. So the first thing we're going to do is build our books due knowledge view. Now this is a nice normal knowledge view. We're going to be looking at the book checkout form. And we are going to go back to knowledge view results. It's going to be displayed in grid. So it's a nice normal knowledge view in that sense. For our options, again, all I did is copy the original prompt book check-in knowledge view for this one. So it just says form instances here, but now this is a knowledge view that you're going to be able to use for just sort of normal day-to-day reporting. So whatever changes you might want to make here to it in order to ensure that you can perform your actions on objects or whatever it is that you'd like to do, you can feel free to configure those here. On our columns, all I really returned is name. I just made it as simple as possible. I just wanted to return the name of the book, and then when I ran it, it would just open up the books. It's not going to return anything now because we don't have anything checked out. So it's going to be blank at this point, but I'm just returning the name. You probably would want to return the checkout date, and whether it's the other things don't matter other than whether check-in has been prompted, because this is always going to return checked out books. But we're also going to have to filter it for that. So it's really only going to show us what books are due. So it's only going to show the books due. You could return the due date or anything else you wanted, but I just sort of elided past that for just the name, but you could add all of the other columns if you wanted here. We're going to do something slightly different here on this one. Because we have removed whether the book check-in has been prompted for this particular knowledge view. We're going to keep the other two, the first two filters that were on the previous knowledge view, we are going to keep them. We only want to see books that are checked out, and we only want to see books that were checked out more than 365 days ago, or that the checkout date is less than or equal to the date that was 365 days ago. And that will just return just those items to us. Okay, great. So this is going to return some list of items. In fact, let's make it return a list of items to us. Let's go back real quick while we're here. And let's just do a book checkout form for a book that was checked out a year ago. So we will say for this one, that we are going to return Virgil's History of Rome. Let's spell it correctly. And let's say that we checked this out in 2025, and we checked it out on, let's say we checked it out on March 24th. Dale Franks checked it out, and the book is checked out, and we're going to go ahead and submit it. This will just give us an overdue book. As we saw earlier, we had no overdue books when we ran the knowledge view. Now when we go to our books due knowledge view and we update and run it, there is my book checked out. History of Rome on 3/24/2025. So this book has now been checked out more than a year, and it is a valid book checkout. It's brand new. We just created it. And it appears in our knowledge view. Now we have to talk about the business value that we're going to create. So for the business value, we're going to use a knowledge view data source. And the knowledge view that we're going to use is our books due knowledge view. That will be the data source for this. Of course, anytime that you use a knowledge view as a data source, you are going to need to fill out the execute knowledge view under this user context property. Because business values are universal and anyone can invoke them on any form or anywhere where they're called, you have to be worried about permissions, because not all users will have permissions to see all knowledge views. The point of a business value is to let everybody see the data. It's to virtualize it so that it's universally available. If we did not have the execute knowledge view, etc. property, then every time this business value got called, Process Director would attempt to run the knowledge view as the user who had invoked the business value in that particular situation. That user may or may not have the ability to look at the underlying knowledge view because they don't have the appropriate permissions set. In that case, the knowledge view would error out. It would not return what you wanted it to return. So this property enables you to just set the user that Process Director will use to run the knowledge view. When the business value gets invoked and the knowledge view gets called, Process Director will simply pretend, in this case, that I, Dale Franks, am the knowledge view user, and it will run the knowledge view with my permissions assigned to it. I have permission to do anything on the system, so it will just run. It might be a good practice for you to create a built-in user on your system. Call them the knowledge view user or something similar. Assign them to a group like, admin or power users or whatever group that you have that has the ability to basically see anything they need to see in the content list. So they at least have to have view permissions for it and run permissions. That way, whenever you create any sort of business value that has a knowledge view data source, you could simply apply that knowledge view user as the user context for the business value, so that you're always assured that that business value is going to run with the user assigned to it being one with the appropriate permissions to see everything. On this system, it is me, because this is my system. Once you've got it set up, obviously, you test the knowledge view. This knowledge view returned one result. We know that that's what it's supposed to return because we only have one overdue book in the system. So we're good to go. We only need one property. We're just going to call this property books. Now, normally, whenever you're creating a knowledge view business value, what you want to use is the knowledge view column, right? You're generally wanting to return the data that is in the knowledge view, so you would set it to a knowledge view column. In this case, we don't care what the data is. If people want to see what the data is in the knowledge view, they can open the knowledge view. We're creating this business value for a very specific purpose, which is to determine whether or not our goal invokes the check-in process or not. So all we need to know are the number of rows in this knowledge view. If this knowledge view returns 0 rows, then no books are due, and so we're not going to do anything. If there are 1 or more rows in this knowledge view, we do, in fact, want to invoke the goal. So this business value is only going to return an integer number. It's going to return 0 through n. If it is anything other than 0, we got books that need to be checked in. We need to invoke those processes. If it's 0, then who cares? We don't need to do anything. Our job is done. And that brings us to the operation of the books due goal. So all of the items that we built so far, the previous 8 items, the only purpose they have is to make this books due goal work the way that we want it to. So we're going to set some conditions for this goal as to whether the number of rows in that books due KView is 0 or something else. And then we're going to determine what we're going to do for the goal. And so let's take a look at the goal's direct configuration. The goal is not active. I don't actually want it run every day on my system. And it would be pointless anyway, because as soon as this is over, there will be no books checked out. So it's kind of pointless to have. In the real world, obviously, whenever you're ready for this goal to operate, you would set the goal to active. It's currently set for inactive because I never want it to run. We'll just use the evaluate now button as necessary to invoke the goal. We're not going to hit it now because we know that we're going to have a book due. So let's take a look at our options for this. In our execution options. Now, we're not going to get into the specifics of goals here. And in this case, it doesn't really matter what we have set up other than the very top one. I want to execute all of my actions when the conditions are met. I always want it to do that. There is this conditions are met and goal result differs from the previous result. I don't really care about that option. It would not affect how this particular goal runs, so there's no reason to change it. Execute all actions when conditions are met and only the first action. Again, the default is all actions. I'm keeping it set there. Don't need to make any changes there either because both of my conditions are mutually exclusive and I'm only going to have 2 conditions. Therefore, only one of these conditions can ever run, and every time this goal is invoked, one or the other of these conditions will always run. So it doesn't matter what I set execute for because I've only got 2 conditions. I've only got 2 possible things that can happen, and they're both mutually exclusive. However, there is one change I need to make again. Execute knowledge view under this user context. For this goal, if I have books due, I'm going to want to run my prompt book check-in knowledge view. And so I've got to be able to run it again in the context of a user with the permissions to run that knowledge view. So in my case, I'm going to set it to me, but whatever user that you need to set it to, you are going to need to set this property under execution options because you are invoking the run knowledge view action in our conditions and results. It can't run it if it doesn't know the context of who to run it into. Interestingly enough, if I didn't set this on this system, every time I invoked something, it would run it as me and everything would just work perfectly. And I would think, oh man, this is fine. That's not going to be true on a production system. I know that I'm the only one generally who's ever going to invoke anything. So if it just automatically, my context gets passed through and everything just runs like magic, that doesn't mean on a production system, I don't have to set that. And by the way, this is true for you if you're an implementer on a system. If you don't set the context, either in the business value, as we just saw, or here in the goal, everything might still work fine for you because you probably have godlike permissions to do everything on your server. The first time a user tries to do it and they don't have permissions, everything is going to go all, as the scientists say, higgledy-piggledy whenever somebody tries to run this. So it's easy to forget when you have full permissions on everything that this knowledge view context is super important. So I stress it once again. So let's look at our conditions and results. So my very first condition that I have set up, I'm checking the due date check business value. I'm checking to see if the value is greater than 0. So if it is anything other than 0 rows in the knowledge view, then it's going to return that number. Although if there are 0 rows in the knowledge view, it will return this number. So I'm just checking to see if it's greater than 0, because if there are any rows that are returned by the knowledge view, then my business value is going to return that number of rows. And any number other than 0 means I need to prompt my book check-in. So I'm going to do two things here. I'm obviously going to set the books due result so that if I check my knowledge view, or I'm sorry, if I check my goal after it runs, it will return books due as the value if I have, in fact, books due. Once it sets this result, I then want to perform this action. And in this case, I want to run knowledge view. There's a reason I want to run knowledge view. Yes, I can run a process from this goal directly. My problem is I don't know what books are checked out. Remember, at this point, the only data that I, Mr. Books Due Goal, has is that there are more than 0 books that are due. And that's all I know. I don't know what the books are. I don't know their titles. I don't know who checked them out. I don't know when they checked them out. All I know is that I got a number of 1 or higher, and now I got to do stuff. I actually may need to run more than one process. Now, it would be great if I had all the information I needed as a goal to be able to invoke the process. And, sometimes A, I do, or B, I don't care because the process is just going to run independently. So it doesn't really matter. But that's relatively rare. It happens more than just, mildly occasionally. But I think probably if I was to do a survey, in most cases, I'm actually going to do multiple things or kick off multiple processes. And to kick off those multiple processes, now currently it's only going to kick off one process. And if I always knew that it was only going to be that one process that ever got kicked off, then I might be able to do run process. But I think more commonly, I'm going to need to invoke 1 plus n processes. So I'm going to need to run the knowledge view. That's why we built the prompt book check-in knowledge view, so that it will return all of the books that are due to be checked in. Like I said, if there are 5 of them, I'm going to have 5 rows in the knowledge view, and that knowledge view will invoke 5 separate timeline instances, 1 for each of those books. So I'm going to use run knowledge view, and I'm going to prompt book check-in. Conversely, it might be that I have no books that are due, in which case the due date check books business value is going to return the 0 that I expect. Now, if I do get that 0, well, I do want to set my value of books due to nothing due, because nothing is in fact due. And That's all I want to do. I only want to set the result. There's no reason to do anything if there are no books due. However, because I'm setting the result, that means that if I was to query the business value, so if I was just to query not the business value, the goal. So if I was to query the goal right now via, say, a system variable, that would be the value that is returned. Nothing due would come back from this goal. So that would let me know that as of today, there are no books due. And then the last thing I need to do is set up the evaluation frequency. I've just got it set to the default of 1 day, and I've got it set limit to business hours. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter for my purposes since this goal is not active anyway, and it will only run when I manually click the evaluate now. So therefore, I didn't make any changes here. Obviously, you would want to set the evaluation frequency to whatever frequency you believed it should be set to. I think probably if you're doing a books due thing, and usually for compliance purposes, you'd probably want to run it on at least a daily basis because generally, especially if you have like maintenance requirements for equipment and that equipment needs to be returned to be sent back to maintenance, and somebody might need to exchange. Usually what happens in a case like that is I need to exchange equipment. I've got, equipment part A. It is now, I've reached the, mean time between failure limit on that piece of equipment. What I'm probably going to need to do is take that equipment back, return it to maintenance, and then I'm going to have to check out a new piece of that equipment that has, gone through maintenance and is ready for reissue. So I'm just going to swap out pieces of equipment, and I'm going to probably need that same piece of equipment, but now I've got it for another year until it needs to come back for maintenance. So if I was to run the goal now, I would invoke the process. Let me just check to be sure what I've got here. Okay, now we're going to test the application. So we already have one book that we have simulated as overdue, and we have other books that have already been checked in. I think we'll create a new book that is not overdue. Actually, I think we already did that today, so we have that instance as well. So we're going to trigger the goal, and I should just have one book that is due at this point. So let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and, let's see what we got running currently. Let's go to our book checkout form. Let's go to our form instances. And so here are some books checked out. So I've got this book checked out on 3/24/2025, but I've got books checked out on 3/21/2025. That book has probably already been checked in, I believe. Let's check, be sure. Yes, that book has already been prompted. So that testing worked. So foundation should have, foundation is checked out. It is due in 2026. And Nightfall is checked out. It is due in 2027. Wait a second. No, this one's due in 2027 too. It's checked out in 2026. And then my Virgil's History of Rome is checked out. It was checked out in 2025. So what I will expect to see is these two books to not appear and the one book here, my History of Rome, to appear. We already know this is going to happen, by the way, because we already ran the books due knowledge view, and we already know that it's going to return only one row. Ta-da! So we know that when we run books due, we're going to invoke one process. So we'll go to books due. Now, right now, our current goal value is nothing due. So when I evaluate this goal, that is going to change. It's going to change to books due as my current value, as it was for my previous value, and it's going to kick off our process. So we'll click Evaluate Now. And it has evaluated, and here we go. I now have a notification that says book check-in required. It even says it in really big text because I just saved that change to the template. The book is The History of Rome. It was checked out in 2025 by me. Now I need to complete the check-in. So I can simply click the complete the check-in button to open it, or I can also go to my user profile and oh my goodness, I have many running processes that I do not want to be running. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do everything but that process. I'm going to cancel all these other processes. Oh, actually, I should have just looked at right here. Here's my task. I have a task assigned, and it should stay assigned once I have canceled all of these 19 other processes. There we go. There is my one process. And let's see. Well, it mainly cleared out my task list. I obviously have some other things that I need to fix up, but here's my book, my check book in task. So just like with the email, I can simply open it here. It will open up my form and I can check my book in. Now for my purposes, I'm just going to uncheck the checked out. So now it has magically been checked in. I suspect the check-in process, especially for expensive equipment, will probably be somewhat more rigorous. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and complete my task. It obviously has disappeared off of my task list. If we go back, we can look at our books due goal. And I would expect to see books due as my goal value. The previous goal value was, of course, nothing due. And if I was to hit the evaluation button here again, now my goal value is nothing due. Nothing happened. It appears that our check-in process is working exactly as designed. So with that in mind, I think, as my presentation indicates, that we are done. And I think we have adequately demonstrated that we can automate multiple processes on the fly without having to keep a whole bunch of in-flight process timelines constantly running in the background. As I said earlier, sometimes you do, in fact, need to do that, but a lot of times you don't. And any type of equipment or book or any other checkout is a perfect example of why you would just want to check it out, have the checkout process be done, and then at some point in the future, you can pick it back up again and force the check-ins. With that, however, though, I think we are done. So I'm going to return the balance of the time to you today. Thanks for joining me. It's always a pleasure bringing the training webinar to you, and I will look forward to doing it again next week. Until then, so long.